For too long, for a decade or more, there's been a cozy relationship between the oil companies and the federal agency that permits them to drill. Seems as if permits were too often issued based on little more than assurances of safety from the oil companies. That cannot and will not happen anymore. To borrow an old phrase, we will trust, but we will verify. And so I've asked Secretary Salazar to conduct a top-to-bottom reform of the Minerals Management Service.
The Minerals Management Service, Minerals Management Service, Minerals Management Service. Why is that? Oh, yeah, right. Minerals Management Service, home to the only sex and drugs and government scandal I know of where the phrase snorts crystal meth off a toaster oven applies. The Minerals Management Service is supposed to be regulating and collecting royalties from oil companies, but, you know, one tiny little investigation from the Inspector General, and suddenly everybody knows them as the agency with the, quote, culture of substance abuse and promiscuity. That now infamous Inspector General's investigation revealed that the Minerals Management Service's employees did drugs together, including, of course, the snorting of crystal meth off a toaster oven. The report found that almost a third of the Minerals Management Service employees in a particular program had accepted gifts from the oil companies they were supposed to be regulating. MMS employees in that office reportedly had sexual encounters with one another and with oil industry employees. Again, the folks they were supposed to be regulating, and 2 MMS employees. This might even be my favorite part that doesn't involve a toaster oven. 2 MMS employees reported that they once stayed overnight at an oil company's resort lodge because they were too drunk to get themselves home. In other news, apparently oil companies have resort lodges where they get oil industry regulators from the government hammered. This incredible ethical catastrophe took place in the Royalty in Kind office of the Minerals Management Service in Denver. That was the part of the agency responsible for collecting royalties for those companies drilling our oil. Companies taking our oil out of federal land are supposed to pay us for it. The sex and drugs and toaster ovens and drunk resort lodges office was the office responsible for collecting those royalties. Freeze on that thought. Minerals Management Service, regulating the oil industry, collecting royalties from the oil industry, quite literally in bed, drunk with the oil industry. Now, keep that in mind when you hear this next part. This is the next thing that President Obama said in his announcement today about the Minerals Management Service. Here's what he said that the Interior Secretary, Ken Salazar, is planning on doing with the Minerals Management Service.
This week, he announced that the part of the agency which permits oil and gas drilling and collects royalties will be separated from the part of the agency in charge of inspecting the safety of oil rigs and platforms and enforcing the law. That way there's no conflict of interest, real or perceived.
Does that make sense, right? The Obama administration wants to separate these 2 halves of the Minerals Management Service so there won't be a conflict of interest. And it does make sense if you think about it. They issue permits that allow oil companies to drill, and they collect royalties and fees from those oil companies for that drilling. There is a conflict of interest there if that same agency is also responsible for making sure that drilling is safe. If you think about it, if they shut down an oil rig because it's not safe, the agency can then be criticized that they shouldn't have given this permit for this thing in the first place if it didn't end up being safe. So that's a butt-covering incentive to make sure that nothing on that rig ever gets flagged as unsafe, since that's the office that permitted it. Not to mention, if the Minerals Management Service shuts down an oil rig because it's not safe, guess who isn't collecting royalties from that rig anymore? The Minerals Management Service. So dividing this agency in 2 would seem to get rid of that particular conflict of interest problem. But it also does something else. It takes the safety inspections responsibility, which we know is frankly pretty important, away from the division of the agency that is best known for the snorting meth off a toaster oven thing. Removing that part of the agency from the part that deals with safety concerns seems smart even without any deeper analysis. But there is some worrying reporting in the New York Times today about the culture of the agency. That makes it seem like there is a bigger problem here, that there will still be trouble at the Minerals Management Service, no matter how many times you slice and dice and discipline it, unless you make some big changes. For starters, the Minerals Management Service isn't supposed to have sole unilateral decision-making power over offshore drilling, say, in the Gulf of Mexico. It's supposed to consult with NOAA, with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, first, to make sure that NOAA also thinks it's safe to drill in the Gulf. In fact, the Minerals Management Service is required by law to get permission from NOAA before it allows drilling in places like the Gulf, where drilling might affect marine life. But the New York Times reports today that the MMS apparently just ignored that federal law, and they handed out Gulf Coast drilling permits to BP and, quote, dozens of other oil companies, not only without getting those legally required permits from NOAA, but after NOAA warned them that continued drilling in the Gulf was harming endangered marine mammals. Last week, in the midst of the crisis in the Gulf and the growing questions about the safety of offshore drilling in general, the Interior Secretary, Ken Salazar, made an announcement about those apparently all too easy to get offshore drilling permits.
As part of our ongoing efforts to deal with this situation, we also have assigned a team of people that are working hard to develop the recommendations to President Obama. Until we have that review completed, the Department of the Interior and Minerals Management Service will not be issuing any permits for the construction of new offshore wells.
Again, that's Interior Secretary Ken Salazar. That was more than a week ago, declaring a moratorium on new offshore drilling permits. No more permits, at least until a review of the current unstoppable underwater oil spewing leak has been completed. Right? It's not going to happen. There aren't going to be any new ones. Well, according to the Times, the Minerals Management Service, quote, has issued at least 5 final approval permits to new drilling projects in the Gulf since last week. Head of the department says they're not doing it. They're not going to do it anymore. Moratorium. Whoa, it's on hold. And the agency just keeps doing it. And here's where it gets really good. Listen to this. According to the Times, quote, despite being shown records indicating otherwise, a spokeswoman for the Minerals Management Service said her agency had granted no new permits since Mr. Salazar made his announcement. So they're showing the Minerals Management Service spokeswoman the permits that they've been issuing, and she's denying that they exist. So who's issuing those permits then? Minerals Management Service spokeswoman says they haven't been issuing any new permits. The folks at NOAA say they didn't sign off on the drilling permit for the well that exploded last month and is currently pumping thousands of barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico every day. But these permits are definitely being approved. Even the 5 new ones issued since last week. What's the explanation for this? I guess there's a ghost agency somewhere inside the federal government that is handing out offshore oil drilling permits like candy in the middle of a moratorium on offshore oil drilling permits. How did this part of the government get so crack-addled? And what's it going to take to fix it? Joining us now is Danielle Bryan, Executive Director of the Project on Government Oversight, better known as POGO, a nonprofit government watchdog organization that has been following the Minerals Management Service since the early 1990s. Danielle, thanks very much for your time today. It's nice to see you.
It's great to see you.
What do you think of this decision to split the MMS into 2 parts? Is that a big deal? Is it going to fix any of this problem?
It's a big deal. It's just not enough of a big deal. You know, what you talked about is that they're going to finally move at least the safety inspections part of the office out of them. But we still have the big problem that all the auditing, you were talking about the royalties, the meth on the toaster oven, those guys are still hanging out together. So you've got the auditors who are supposed to be making sure that the taxpayers are getting those royalties, still hanging out in the same office with the people who are promoting the drilling and issuing those permits. So that part of MMS still has got to be moved out. So you have all of the oversight functions out of MMS.
In terms of the overall problem at this agency, one of the ways that it has been diagnosed, the sort of shorthand for this in the past, has been the revolving door between lobbyists and regulators, described as a problem throughout government. Is it especially egregious in this part of the government and around the oil industry?
It is unbelievably bad. The former head of MMS is currently the chief lobbyist, essentially, for offshore drillers, the National Ocean Industries Association, and their mission is to help with the regulatory environment to help make sure they can get more offshore drilling. And the former head of MMS also is was the head of that agency as well. It's unbelievably bad.
Is the situation any different under the Obama administration than it was under the Bush administration? Has any progress been made?
Absolutely. I think this may be one of the most important things President Obama has done. Early in his administration, he changed the rules on revolving door. So the head of MMS can no longer turn around and become the chief lobbyist for the industry that they're overseeing. So we're not going to see that problem in the future, but we're seeing now the impact of what the revolving door can do.
In terms of getting to the root of the problem here, obviously, this is a situation that's been a long time in coming. When the president made his comments today, he talked about, for the better part of a decade, a lot of these problems having root just in this one agency. How much of an overhaul does it take? How dramatic does the action need to be? Should we be expecting mass firing? Should there be hearings on the scientists who spoke with the Times today who said that their findings were still being quashed within this agency if they didn't comport with what the industry wanted?
This is just a really weird agency. I mean, it's more than a decade, really. We've been doing it for almost 2 decades. We've been looking at this particular agency. The culture is one where they have Christmas parties at the federal offices where the lobbyists are coming over and hanging out. This has been going on for years. Just last year, MMS issued Transocean a safety award. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that's been going on. So it is really deeply rooted in their culture.
What I find myself hoping for is an Elliot Ness who can sort of get in there, ride herd, and actually really bring